It began, as these things so often do, with a dinner invitation that ought never to have been sent. It arrived on a Tuesday, the sort of drizzly, listless day that encourages suicide in minor poets and long letters to the Times from retired colonels. Lord Peter Wimsey, that perennially amused barometer of England's social tremors, was at his Piccadilly flat conducting a most delicate experiment, testing whether a 1919 Croft could hold its dignity alongside a 1932 Lapsang Souchong when paired with Stilton and sardines. "Bunter," he said, peering over his pince-nez at the small envelope that had arrived on the silver salver, "this appears to be a ghost's RSVP." "Indeed, my lord?" Bunter, who had once stared down a German trench mortar without blinking, now regarded the cream vellum with all the attention of a man identifying suspicious stains on a dinner jacket. Lord Peter slit it open with a mother-of-pearl paper knife. The stationery was of the finest stock, watermarked, embossed, and bearing the sigil of Haverley Hall, an ivy-entombed Tudor manor house whose owners had never quite forgiven Charles X for losing his head, nor recovered from a scandal involving a Turkish bath and a missing dowry in 1876. Lady Matilda Vestris requests the pleasure of Lord Peter Wimsey's company for dinner at Haverley Hall on Saturday, the 14th of October, at 7:30 in the evening. Formal dress. No flowers. "No flowers," Lord Peter murmured. "A most unorthodox stipulation. What's next? No dessert, no poison, no amateur theatricals with a hint of incest?" Bunter did not dignify this with a response. "Lady Matilda, my lord, she passed away in July, did she not?" "Quite so. Died in her sleep. Heart failure, I believe. Not uncommon for women who collect Sèvres figurines and pugs in equal quantity. Yet here she is, posthumously hospitable. One must admire the commitment." He rose, long limbs unfolding with the grace of a fencing master, and drifted toward the window as if the fog might clarify the matter. "Tell me, Bunter, do the dead often entertain?" "I couldn't say, my lord, though in my experience they are less particular about table settings than the living." A tap on the door interrupted the philosophical musings. Parker of Scotland Yard appeared with his usual expression of dogged patience, and clothes that fit as though tailored by a man with a grudge against the human form. "You've heard, I suppose," Parker said, shrugging out of a damp trench. "Coat, if it's about the supper invitation from beyond the veil," Wimsey replied, "then I am, as they say, all ears and stiff collar." Parker dropped a small, crisp Times clipping on the mantel. It read, rather succinctly, "Anomalous. Invitation sent to local notables. Several individuals report receiving invitations to dine with the late Lady Matilda Vestris at Haverley Hall. Authorities dismiss the matter as an elaborate hoax or clerical oversight." "Clerical oversight?" Wimsey scoffed. "What has the church to do with it?" Parker gave him a look. "The estate's current resident, one Mr. Stephen Vestris, nephew and heir, claims to know nothing of it." "But the invitations are real, identical. Same date, same wording." "And no flowers," Wimsey added. Parker nodded. "A local curiosity. Harmless enough. But what caught my attention was the fifth recipient." "Ah," Wimsey said, his eyes narrowing with interest. "And who is our number 5? Miss Diana Bickerton, young, inheriting, last seen accepting the invitation with a smile. Found this morning on the grounds of Haverley, strangled, possibly with her own scarf." Wimsey lit a cigarette with deliberate slowness, the tip glowing like a small, sinister eye. "Well, well, the dead have always had terrible taste in dinner. Guests." There was a pause as he gazed at the curling smoke. "I suppose we must dress for dinner, Bunter. If Lady Matilda insists upon an audience from the grave, it would be rude not to oblige. And I've always found murder to be a most stimulating hors d'oeuvre." "Yes, my lord," said Bunter, already retrieving the black tie. "Will you be requiring the dueling cane?" "Only if the soup is served late," Wimsey said. "Let us proceed, Parker, to the house where etiquette defies mortality." And so, with ironic grace and the faintest glint of curiosity in his eye, Lord Peter Wimsey accepted the most unusual of invitations, a dinner hosted by a woman several months dead, in a manner dripping with family secrets, where the first course had been murder, and dessert promised to be even more indigestible. The rain had softened into a listless mist by the time Wimsey, Parker and Bunter reached Haverley Hall, a sprawling mass of weathered stone and moss-laced balustrades that crouched on the hill like a dowager, guarding a fading reputation. The gravel crunched underfoot with reluctant obedience as the motor came to a halt before the main portico. Gaslight flickered behind mullioned windows, giving the impression of occupancy. But Whimsy noted with a twitch of the eyebrow that the eastern wing remained resolutely dark. "Strangled on the south lawn, you say?" he asked, stepping from the car and inspecting the facade with a practiced detachment. Parker nodded, lifting his collar against the wind. "Gardner found her around 6:30 this morning. No sign of a struggle, but the grass was damp. Could have erased footprints, or deliberately avoided them," Whimsy murmured, his cane tapping the flagstones like a courtier's commentary. "Tell me, what precisely was Miss Bickerton's connection to the Vestris clan?" "Minor. Distant cousin on the mother's side. Friendly with Stephen, though. Came up from London for the weekend, though no one seems to know who invited her. Not Stephen, according to him. Yet she arrived smiling, and dead by morning. Then, it seems," said Whimsy, pausing before the great oak door, "we must ask the butler." Inside, the hall exhaled must and lavender polish, the perfume of prideful decay. A grandfather clock ticked with disapproving precision, and portraits of frowning ancestors loomed from walls like accusatory magistrates. Jarvis, the butler, emerged, as if summoned by ancestral telepathy. A lean man with a jaw like a nutcracker, and the gaze of one who'd witnessed generations of embarrassment, he inclined his head. "Lord Peter Whimsy, Mr. Parker, welcome to Haverley." "Thank you, Jarvis," said Whimsy, unbuttoning his gloves with an almost musical rhythm. "We trust your employer is expecting us, or at least that the dead are not yet entirely indisposed." Jarvis, without blinking, said, "Mr. Vestris is in the library. If you would follow me, gentlemen." The library was long, oak-panelled, and possessed of that stale scholarliness particular to houses where no one actually reads. Stephen Vestris stood before the fire, a man of 35 with prematurely greying temples, a tired elegance, and a suit that had been expensive 6 years ago. "Lord Peter," he said, voice clipped, "I wish I could say this was a pleasure." "You could, of course," Whimsy said lightly, "but you'd be lying." "Quite all right. Now, this charming little conundrum of yours, an invitation from your late aunt, a dinner that shouldn't exist, and one unfortunate young lady found as stiff as the pheasant in the pantry." Stephen flinched. "I didn't invite her. I hadn't seen Diana in months since Aunt Matilda's funeral, actually, and I certainly didn't send that invitation." Whimsy studied him, noting the tightness in the jaw, the tremor in the hand, reaching for a decanter. "Who would have access to your aunt's stationery?" Stephen poured himself a stiff whiskey. "The whole household, theoretically. But only Jarvis knew where she kept the correspondence drawer. She was fastidious." "Jarvis has the air of a man who considers forgery beneath him," Whimsy murmured. "And yet the invitations were certainly real." "Bunter?" Bunter stepped forward and offered up the envelope and card for Stephen's inspection. "That's her hand," Stephen said grimly. "Distinctive capitals. She always dotted her I's like daggers. And the seal, her personal stamp, a little lion rampant, clutching a daisy." Whimsy tapped the card with his forefinger. "So either someone has gone to a great deal of trouble to imitate her, or Aunt Matilda has developed a flair for posthumous etiquette." Parker cleared his throat. "Mr. Vestris, can you account for your whereabouts last night?" "I was here," he said. "In this room. Reading." "Alone?" "Of course." "How terribly unhelpful," Whimsy said cheerfully. "No ghost witnesses to speak of?" "I've nothing to hide," Stephen snapped. "Splendid. Then you'll permit us to look around." "I can't stop you," Stephen said, defeated. "But I'd appreciate some discretion. Haverley has had enough scandal without this becoming a circus." "We'll endeavour to keep the elephants to a minimum," Whimsy assured him, then turned to Bunter. "Make a note of all visible clocks in the house. I suspect time is going to matter rather more than Stephen wishes." With Parker speaking, to the local constable outside and Stephen glowering into his whiskey, Whimsy moved with casual curiosity through the drawing room, the morning room, and finally into the west hallway, where a large French window gave onto the south lawn. The latch was recently oiled. "Curious," he murmured. "Someone anticipated the need for a silent exit." He stepped outside. The lawn stretched like a green velvet rug toward the hedgerow, mist hanging over it like unshed tears. A rose arbor stood to the left, quaint, concealing, and with crushed petals underfoot. "Peculiar," he said aloud. "The roses bloom, the victim dies, and someone walks softly enough to avoid notice, but not petals." "Sir?" Bunter appeared beside him, impeccable even in damp air. "I believe, Bunter," said Whimsy, "we may have our first whisper of an alibi unraveling. The window latch is clean and the ground shows signs of recent pressure, though not enough for the gardener to have disturbed it early. A dry patch in the rain, sir? Or someone stood there, waiting, watching, possibly, even calling Miss Bickerton to her death." They returned indoors, where a faint chime announced the arrival of another guest, Lady Eugenia Drelling, a neighbour and dowager whose morals were loose, but whose information was often tightly stitched. She greeted Whimsy with a smirk. "Peter, darling, I wondered if you'd appear. It's all so frightfully Greek tragedy, isn't it? Invitations from the grave, dead girls in the roses, and no one remembering who brought the pudding." "Do sit, Eugenia," Whimsy said, ushering her to a chair. "And tell me, had you an invitation?" "Oh, absolutely, same wording. I assumed it was a joke. Or Stephen losing his marbles, but then Diana, poor creature. She wasn't the sort you kill, really. She hardly had the energy for blackmail. Yet she came. Well, yes, but not for Stephen, I think." Whimsy's eyes glinted. "No? She had a bit of a fascination with Aunt Matilda, spoke about her rather a lot at the garden club, said she was misunderstood, that sort of thing. All very peculiar. Matilda, misunderstood. She was practically a statue with pearls." "Did Diana ever suggest why?" Lady Eugenia sipped sherry with feline satisfaction. "Not directly, but she hinted that Matilda was keeping a secret, something about a man from her youth, old love affair. Diana seemed to think it was tragic." Whimsy leaned back, gaze distant. "A tragic love, a hidden drawer, and an invitation from the dead. How very Baroque." "Don't be absurd," Lady Eugenia said. "It's all nonsense." "Perhaps," he murmured, "but nonsense has a way of resolving into murder, especially when sentiment is involved." He rose and signaled to Bunter. "I think we must visit the late lady's rooms, Bunter, before someone remembers to tidy away the evidence." And so, with the house whispering secrets through creaking floorboards and the mist clinging to the windows like guilty breath, Lord Peter Whimsy ascended the staircase, toward the chambers of a woman long dead and a truth that refused to remain. Buried, the upper floor of Haverley had the peculiarly muffled hush of old grief, thick carpets that swallowed footsteps, drapes that deadened sound, and walls that seemed to lean inwards as if to eavesdrop. Whimsy moved with his usual feline grace, cane tapping once or twice against the banister, more for rhythm than support. Bunter followed at a respectful distance, carrying a leather-bound notebook and glancing occasionally at the peculiar angles of sconces and mirror frames as if they might confess something under duress. Matilda Vestris's rooms were at the far end of the east wing, the very wing that had stood dark and unused since the family matriarch's death. Jarvis had informed them the doors had remained locked since the funeral. Stephen had no wish to enter them, and the servants, though less demonstrative, had not protested. "I dislike the idea of things left undisturbed for sentimental reasons," Whimsy remarked. "It tends to cultivate either ghosts or blackmail." He produced a small brass key that Jarvis had offered without comment, and with a turn the door clicked open. The air inside was stale and powdery, like old lavender crushed beneath hymnals. Whimsy entered, eyes sharp, nostrils flaring faintly. "No dust," he murmured. "Indeed, my lord," said Bunter, noting the sheen of the mahogany desk and the polished surface of the dressing table. "Someone's been in recently, or regularly." Whimsy stepped lightly to the escritoire, a delicate affair in walnut with ornamental brass pulls, and ran a finger along the seam of one drawer. It opened stiffly, the scent of dried violets wafting up. Inside were ivory envelopes, neatly tied in, bundles with pale ribbon, and a selection of embossed writing paper. All bore the Vestris family crest, the lion rampant with daisy. He plucked one envelope and held it to the light. "Precisely the same as the invitation received by Miss Bickerton," he said. "And note the ink blot there, Bunter. A hesitating writer, not the firm hand of our matriarch, I think. A forgery, sir. Too early to say. But if one were inclined to imitate Aunt Matilda, this would be the very bureau to start from. Do check the wastepaper basket. Bunter obliged, and retrieved from within a crumpled sheet that, once smoothed, revealed a discarded attempt at what appeared to be a list. 5 names, he murmured. Stephen, Diana, Lady Eugenia, Mr. Parbold, the solicitor, I presume, and Monsieur Chamberlain. Does that name appear in the family ledger? Whimsy frowned. Not that I recall, though Matilda may have had acquaintances beyond the usual grasp of genealogical charts. Still, if 5 were intended and only 4 arrived, who was left out? He turned back to the escritoire and methodically opened each drawer, receipts, recipes, old theatre programs, until one compartment yielded a small red leather notebook bound in a satin ribbon. It bore no name, but a gold-stamped MV on the cover confirmed ownership. He flipped it open and skimmed several entries. Fascinating, he murmured. The tone is guarded, but there are entries about someone called the Man in Grey. Sounds rather like a sensation novel. MG visited again, would not enter through the front, insisted on discretion, must speak with Diana soon. Whimsy looked up sharply. So she did know Diana well. Bunter raised an eyebrow. A liaison, perhaps? Or a scandal past its sell-by date? He closed the book. I think it would be a kindness if... Stephen did not see this, at least not until the dust has settled. A faint creak behind them turned both men's heads. Parker had entered, brushing rain from his coat. She wasn't strangled with rope, he announced. It was a scarf. Silk, no label, pale blue, and it wasn't hers. Diana's bags are still packed. 2 dresses, no scarf. Silk, Whimsy echoed. Soft enough to leave minimal bruising. Someone knew what they were doing. He motioned to Parker and passed him the red notebook. Read that. I believe our victim was entangled in something older than her own tragedy. As Parker leafed through it, Whimsy wandered to the wardrobe and opened it. A neat row of widow's garments lined the rail, somber in tone, but all freshly brushed. On a high shelf rested a tin box with a broken clasp. Inside were photographs, sepia portraits, stiff poses, and folded beneath them a set of letters tied with string. Whimsy selected one at random and unfolded it. Bunter, he said slowly, would you agree this handwriting is not the same as the invitations? Bunter stepped forward, inspecting the looped signature. You're devoted, Michael. Different slope, finer pressure, and the capital M is shaped like a bird's wing. The invitation had flat capitals. Exactly. These are authentic. The invitations... Can't not. Whimsy scanned another letter, and here he is again, Michael Chamberlain. So Chamberlain from the list wasn't an oversight. It was a 5th guest. Parker looked up. Then where is he? Whimsy's expression turned thoughtful. Either he declined, or he was intercepted. He tapped the envelope. These were dated 20 years ago, yet Aunt Matilda was still writing of him just before her death. It seems Diana was attempting to trace him, or bring him back into Matilda's life. You think Diana knew about these letters? Parker asked. I think she must have. There's an intimacy in her mentioning Matilda's unfulfilled past. To Lady Eugenia. She likely read more than she admitted, perhaps too much. And if someone else discovered how far her curiosity had reached... A shout came from downstairs, hurried footsteps, voices raised. All 3 men turned. Whimsy was already at the door, cane swinging as he descended. In the drawing room, Jarvis was attempting to keep order as a drenched figure stood defiantly by the hearth, mud streaking his trousers and an air of the hunted about him. I told. Them I was expected, he snapped. By Miss Bickerton herself. I have the letter. Look. He thrust out a dampened envelope. Whimsy took it, eyeing the stranger. Tweed coat, pince-nez, and very late to the party, he said. You must be Michael Chamberlain. The man blinked. Yes, but how did... Whimsy smiled thinly. We've been looking for you, Mr. Chamberlain. Your name has surfaced in some very intriguing correspondence. He turned the envelope in his fingers. And you received this... when? 3 days ago. It was most peculiar. I hadn't heard from Matilda in years. But the handwriting, it looked like hers. I assumed... Well, I assumed she wanted to make amends. Parker stepped forward. You realize she's been dead these last 3 months? Chamberlain paled. I didn't. I only just returned from a posting in the Isles. I thought, wait, then who sent this? That, Whimsy said, is precisely the question we mean to answer. And I suspect, Mr. Chamberlain, that whoever did also arranged for Diana Bickerton to receive one. Your presence here now suggests the sender hoped to cause a confrontation. Chamberlain opened his mouth, then closed it. He looked around, dazed. Whimsy's eyes narrowed. One more question, if you please. When you arrived just now, which door did you use? The French windows. The front was locked. I knocked, but no one came. Whimsy exchanged a glance with Bunter. Of course you did. He turned back to Parker with a glint in his eye. This case, my dear Parker, he said, has just taken on the flavor of a perfectly underdone pheasant. Rich, obscure, and liable to turn sour if not consumed quickly. Let us now determine who in this house knew that Mr. Chamberlain was meant to arrive, and who had a very good reason to ensure he didn't arrive earlier. As rain lashed again, at the windows and the fire hissed in the grate, the shadows seemed to lengthen perceptibly. Secrets like guests were beginning to arrive, uninvited. The arrival of Michael Chamberlain at Haverley, shrouded as he was in a sodden tweed coat and the faint, persistent odor of the sea, had introduced a new complexity to an already tangled weave of secrets. Whimsy, standing by the hearth with his usual composed mien, regarded the newcomer with a keen eye that missed little. The firelight flickered against the high ceiling, casting angular shadows that played across Chamberlain's troubled face, emphasizing lines that bespoke years of restraint and perhaps regret. Mr. Chamberlain, Whimsy began, his voice arching with characteristic dryness, you claim to have received your invitation only 3 days ago, delivered with such discretion that even the household was unaware of your imminent arrival. Chamberlain nodded, running a hand through his damp hair. Yes, my lord. The letter came by post, sealed with the Vestris crest. I confess I was startled. I had long since assumed my connection to the family was severed. Years spent abroad, the bitterness left unsaid. Indeed, Whimsy replied. The past has a particularly inconvenient habit of refusing to remain buried, much like a bad debt or an unpaid dinner bill. Now tell me, what brought you back from your posting so abruptly? Is it merely coincidence that your return aligns with Miss Bickerton's mysterious invitation? The man's gaze faltered for a moment. No coincidence, I assure you. I returned because of the letter to confront what had long been unresolved. I had hoped for reconciliation. Such hopeful sentiments in a house where one of the family lies dead under suspicious circumstances. Whimsy's tone was lightly sardonic, yet the sharpness of his intellect betrayed the gravity of the moment. Bunter, ever vigilant, stepped forward. Might we examine the letter, sir? Its origin, the precise wording might provide us with clues. Chamberlain withdrew the damp envelope from his coat pocket with care, handing it to Bunter, who inspected it closely. Stamped with the Haverley postmark, no less, Bunter noted. Yet the paper seems peculiar, as does the ink. Whimsy took it from him, scrutinizing the elegant script. A model of courteous invitation. Dearest Michael, a dinner awaits you at Haverley that shadows may be lifted. One might almost mistake it for a ghost story. The irony hung briefly in the room before Whimsy's eyes sharpened again. Tell me, Mr. Chamberlain, have you spoken to any of the staff? To whom did you first announce your arrival? Only to Jarvis, the butler. He was less than welcoming, but I sensed something unspoken in his eyes, as if I were intruding upon a stage rehearsal for a play I was never meant to see. A faint smile twitched at Whimsy's lips. Ah, the grand theatre of secrets. And what of the servants? The housemaids, the cook, the groundskeeper? Have you had cause to speak with them? Chamberlain shook his head. No, I have kept mostly to my rooms. The household is wary of me. Suspicion drips from their eyes like rain from eaves. Whimsy's gaze swept the room, taking in the assembled figures. Parker, alert and ready, Bunter, meticulous, Jarvis, whose butlerly mask betrayed subtle unease, and the silent presence of the house itself, as though it breathed beneath their feet. I propose, Whimsy declared, a series of interviews with the staff, one by one. Each may reveal a thread we have yet to tug. Even those who profess ignorance often conceal truths behind a veil of civility. Jarvis cleared his throat. Might I suggest we begin with Miss Norbury, the housekeeper? She has been with the family these 30 years and commands the servants with an iron fist. Wimsey inclined his head. A sensible suggestion, Jarvis. The matronly gatekeeper often knows more than she lets on. The interview took place in the sunlit kitchen, where the scent of freshly baked bread mingled faintly with the musty aroma of polished brass. Miss Norbury, a woman of formidable presence, sat erect, her eyes sharp beneath heavy brows. "I know nothing, sir," she began firmly. "Nothing at all. The household was as usual before the tragedy. Miss Diana's departure to London was expected, her intentions known only to a few." Wimsey smiled thinly. "And yet a letter arrived, an invitation to a dinner from beyond the grave. Surely such an event would not pass unnoticed." Norbury's lips tightened. "Letters come and go, my lord. Many are lost to time or misdelivered. I can only speak of what I see with my own eyes." "Of course," Wimsey agreed, though his tone suggested otherwise. "Tell me, then, about the night Miss Diana was found dead." "The household was asleep," Norbury said without hesitation. "No one heard anything unusual. The night was quiet. Mr. Jarvis made his rounds as usual, no disturbance noted." "Did anyone leave the house after dinner?" Wimsey pressed. "No one. The front door was locked, the side gates secured. I myself ensured they were." Wimsey nodded thoughtfully. "And the French windows? Mr. Chamberlain used them to enter." "Just now," Miss Norbury blinked. "They were usually kept locked, but on occasion the wind would catch them ajar. I cannot say whether they were so that night." "Quite. And what of the clock in the hall?" Wimsey asked, his voice dropping to an almost conspiratorial tone. "The grandfather clock?" Norbury frowned. "It stopped at 10 minutes past 9, the evening of Miss Diana's death. I was told it was broken." "Ah, a broken clock. How convenient," Wimsey murmured. "The time is critical, of course, and if the clock stopped at 9:10 p.m., that might explain why certain testimonies are confused. Timekeeping in Haverley is evidently fallible." Norbury's eyes narrowed slightly. "I assure you, my lord, I had nothing to do with the clock's failure." "Certainly not implying otherwise," Wimsey replied, "but it does make one wonder whether the killer planned with such precision as to take advantage of mechanical failure." He took his leave, promising to speak with more of the household before the evening. Outside, the rain had softened to a gentle drizzle, and the gardens lay sodden and fragrant. Wimsey paused for a moment, fingers tapping lightly against his chin. "This house," he mused aloud to Bunter, "is full of clocks that do not keep time, letters that arrive late, and invitations that summon the dead. One wonders which of these is the true ruse and which the genuine signal." Bunter, ever pragmatic, suggested, "Might we examine the clock more closely, sir? It could be telling us something important if it stopped precisely at 9:10. Wimsey nodded. "Quite so, and after that a conversation with the gardeners and stable hands. There is no detail too small in a mystery of this nature." They moved. Next to the study where the grandfather clock stood, a grand edifice of oak and brass, its pendulum frozen in place. Wimsey crouched before it, inspecting the mechanism. "The spring is broken here," he murmured, "but notice the slight smear of grease that appears fresh. Someone attempted a recent repair, or a deliberate sabotage." Bunter fetched tools, and Wimsey carefully opened the back panel. Inside he found a small scrap of paper wedged near the gears, easily missed by anyone less observant. Unfolding it, Wimsey read aloud, "The truth is in the East Wing. Midnight." He looked up, sharply. A note, hidden where only a careful hand could place it. "Someone wishes to direct our attention, or mislead us under the cover of darkness." Bunter smiled faintly. A midnight message from the dead. How theatrical. Precisely the sort a flourish Matilda Vestris would have enjoyed, Wimsey said, pocketing the note. "We must tread carefully, for the line between clue and trickery is as thin as a cobweb in this house." As twilight deepened, Wimsey prepared for the next round of inquiries, aware that with each answer, more questions emerged. The game was well and truly afoot, and the players moved unseen upon the shadowed boards of Haverley. The hour grew late, and a chill wind whispered along the corridors of Haverley, stirring curtains and setting the ancient floorboards to creaking beneath. Unseen steps. Lord Peter Wimsey, having catalogued the day's revelations and inconsistencies, settled into his accustomed chair in the dimly lit drawing-room, the soft glow of the fireplace casting long shadows that danced across the walls. His gaze lingered, thoughtfully on the scrap of paper discovered within the clock's mechanism, the cryptic injunction, "The truth is in the East Wing. Midnight." Haunting him like a whispered dare, Bunter, ever the discreet observer, stood by the window, his posture attentive yet unobtrusive. "Shall we venture forth at the appointed hour, sir? It strikes me the house itself conspires to make this investigation a theatre of shadows." Wimsey smiled, a thin curl of amusement crossing his lips. "Indeed, Bunter, it seems Miss Vestris or whomever else wishes to draw us into a midnight drama. One can scarcely refuse such an invitation without appearing discourteous, though I trust the denouement will be less spectral and more factual." He rose, adjusting his cravat with deliberate care, and signalled to Bunter to prepare for their nocturnal expedition. As they moved silently through the great hall, the house exhaled an air of brooding expectancy. The ancestral portraits watched down with eyes both stern and inscrutable, the heavy tapestries absorbing the sounds of their footsteps. Approaching the east wing, Wimsey noted the peculiar hush that seemed to cloak the corridor, a silence unbroken by the usual creaks and groans of the old manor. The doors here, more ornate than those elsewhere, bore intricate carvings of ivy and heraldic beasts, their varnish dulled by time yet stubbornly resisting decay. With a deft twist of the key provided by Jarvis, Wimsey eased open the door to the drawing-room, once known as the library annex. The room was shrouded in darkness, save for a faint glimmer from the moonlight streaming through the stained glass window, casting fractured hues upon the aged volumes lining the shelves. On the polished table rested an envelope, the paper heavy and yellowed, sealed with a crimson wax stamp bearing the unmistakable Vestris crest. "Curious," Wimsey murmured, stepping forward to retrieve the letter. He broke the seal with a practiced flick, the faint scent of lavender and old parchment rising. The note inside was brief, written in an elegant hand. "Look not to the past, you know, but to the shadows that lurk beneath the family name." Wimsey's eyes twinkled as he turned the missive over. "The plot thickens, Bunter. Our correspondent clearly delights in the dramatic, though I suspect a kernel of genuine guidance hides beneath this flourish." He scanned the room, noting a slight disturbance in the dust on one particular shelf, a gap between volumes that suggested a recently removed tome. With a quick gesture, Wimsey adjusted the shelf, revealing a concealed compartment behind the row of leather-bound books. Inside lay a small stack of letters bound with a ribbon now faded to a ghostly blue. Extracting them carefully, Wimsey glanced over the top letter. The handwriting was distinctly different from the earlier notes, more hurried, less refined. "Here is correspondence dating some months prior," Wimsey observed. "These letters speak of estrangement, financial woes, and hints at a family secret best kept under lock and key." Bunter peered over his shoulder. "One mentions a John, a name hitherto absent from our inquiries." Wimsey's brows arched. "Precisely. Another thread in this tapestry of deceit. It appears Miss Diana's life was more complicated than even her closest acquaintances suspected." He replaced the letters with care and turned to Bunter. "We must speak with the staff again, particularly those who might have knowledge of this John. And there remains the matter of the broken clock, which suggests the murderer was acutely aware of the house's temporal vulnerabilities." Their exit was as quiet as their entrance, and the night air greeted them with a damp chill. The manor behind seemed to watch them leave, its secrets reluctant to reveal themselves fully. The following morning brought a dreary drizzle. The sky, a uniform grey that flattened the landscape and muted the colours of the gardens. Wimsey and Bunter convened with Jarvis, who had been gathering information discreetly. "Mr. Wimsey," Jarvis began, "Miss Norbury mentioned a former servant named John Hayward, who left the estate under less than honourable circumstances 2 years past. He was said to have grown too familiar with the young mistress." Wimsey's expression sharpened. "A romantic entanglement, then, or something more sinister?" Jarvis hesitated. There were rumors, my lord, that Mr. Hayward's departure was precipitated by a scandal. Some suggested theft, others whispered of threats made against the family. Wimsey tapped his chin thoughtfully. And is he known to have maintained contact with anyone here since his departure? Not to my knowledge, sir, but he is said to reside in the nearby village, though he keeps a low profile. Very well, Wimsey concluded. We shall pay a visit to this Mr. Hayward. Perhaps the shadow he casts extends further than the village bounds. Before departing, Wimsey directed Bunter to revisit the household servants, focusing on subtle inconsistencies in their accounts. The clock may have been a convenient prop, but one hopes no one under this roof possesses the mechanical knowledge to manipulate time itself. Their inquiries uncovered small yet telling details. The groundskeeper recalled hearing the ticking of the clock falter on the night of the murder, but dismissed it as mere wear. The cook remembered Miss Diana asking for a particular poison recipe from an old herbalist's book weeks earlier, something peculiar given her usual prudence. It seems our victim was entangled in matters of both passion and peril, Wimsey remarked, the faintest hint of a smile playing on his lips. Love, money, family secrets, and perhaps a dash of calculated cruelty. Their journey to the village was met with grey skies and a persistent drizzle that seemed to wash the world of colour and cheer. John Hayward's cottage was modest, its garden overgrown but orderly. An elderly woman answered the door, her face lined and wary. "Mr. Hayward is out at the market, ma'am," she said, "but he'll be back soon. Can I say who's calling?" "Lord Peter Wimsey," he introduced himself, with an interest in family matters concerning the late Miss Diana Vestris. The woman's eyes flickered briefly with recognition. "Ah, that's a tangled web, sir. John might be able to shed light if he's willing. He's a proud man, but haunted." Soon enough Hayward returned, a man of middling years with weather-beaten features and eyes that held a flicker of something unspoken. He welcomed Wimsey into the modest sitting-room without hesitation. "Lord Wimsey," he said, "I have no love lost for the Vestris name, yet I never wished harm. Diana was as complicated. There were secrets she took to her grave." Wimsey inclined his head. "We are all complicated, Mr. Hayward, but some complications prove fatal. What can you tell me of your relationship?" Hayward sighed deeply. "We were close once, too close perhaps. When I discovered debts piling up and some dealings I could not condone, I confronted her. It ended badly. I left in anger and shame." "Did you maintain contact?" "Only once," Hayward admitted. "A letter I sent weeks before her death. I warned her someone was watching, waiting to strike." Wimsey's interest sharpened. "A watcher? A foe? Or perhaps a family member disguised in shadows?" Hayward nodded gravely. "I fear the latter. The Vestris name carries more burdens than honours." As the conversation drew to a close, Wimsey thanked Hayward and stepped outside, rain now falling, steadily, blurring the edges of the world. His mind raced, assembling the disparate pieces, the broken clock, the cryptic notes, the vanished servant, the secrets buried beneath polished surfaces. Back at Haverley, the house seemed to settle, deeper into its own mysteries, as if holding its breath for the next revelation. Wimsey lit his pipe thoughtfully, the smoke curling upward in lazy spirals. Time, Bunter, he mused, has been both an ally and an adversary in this case. But all clocks, no matter how well concealed or sabotaged, must eventually strike. The hour of truth. The game continued, the pieces shifting ever so subtly toward a conclusion only the keenest eye could foresee. And as the manor's shadows lengthened, Wimsey prepared for the unravelling that was surely to come. The morning after his visit to John Hayward, Lord Peter Wimsey found himself once again pacing the long, oak-panelled corridors of Haverley, the familiar scent of polished wood and aged leather, mingling with the faintest trace of damp earth brought in by the persistent drizzle. The manor's oppressive atmosphere seemed momentarily lifted by the subtle logic creeping into the tangled threads of the case. Yet the house had a way of pressing back, its silence pregnant with withheld truths. Wimsey stopped before the tall mirror in the hall, adjusting his cravat with the precision of a man preparing for battle rather than an afternoon of polite questioning. He regarded his reflection with the faintest smile. "There is something to be said for the theatricality of murder," he muttered, "but it is the quiet corners where the devil lurks." Bunter appeared at his side, unobtrusive as ever. "I have compiled the statements from the servants, sir. There are discrepancies, though all are careful to maintain an air of ignorance." "Such ignorance is usually a mask," Wimsey replied. "Tell me, Bunter, were there any curious habits noted in the servants' routine? Anything that might seem trivial, but might later prove indispensable?" Bunter nodded, producing a small notebook. "Miss Norbury, the housekeeper, mentioned that the night before Miss Diana's death, the cook was unusually late finishing preparations, and that a strange delivery arrived shortly after midnight. No one knew its contents, as the package was left outside the kitchen door." "Curious indeed," Wimsey said, stroking his chin. "A midnight delivery to a household that prides itself on order and propriety. Did any servant see who left the package?" "Only the groundskeeper, sir. He saw a figure, but claimed the cloak obscured the face." "Cloaks are the uniform of mystery," Wimsey mused dryly. "And yet, this might be the thread we need to pull." He resolved to interview the groundskeeper at once. The man, a grizzled fellow named Davies, was found in the cold, damp stable-yard, attending to the horses with a mechanical efficiency that suggested a man eager to avoid conversation. "Mr. Davies," Wimsey began gently, "I understand you saw someone deliver a package late at night before Miss Diana's unfortunate demise." Davies grunted in affirmation. "I, my lord, was walking past the back gate when I spotted a figure, cloak pulled up tight, face hidden by a wide-brimmed hat. They dropped a small parcel by the kitchen door and vanished down the lane quick as a flash." "Did you notice anything peculiar about the parcel? Size, shape, perhaps a scent?" "No, my lord. It was wrapped in brown paper tied with string. Could have been anything." Wimsey's mind sifted through the possibilities. "And did the figure carry any weapon or behave in a threatening manner?" Davies shook his head. "No, sir, looked like a delivery, nothing more. Thank you, Mr. Davies, your discretion is appreciated." As Davies shuffled away, Wimsey pondered the significance of this anonymous parcel. A delivery at such an unholy hour suggested a secret transaction, perhaps poison, a weapon, or a letter bearing deadly information. The precision of the timing indicated inside knowledge, a familiarity with the household's rhythms. Returning indoors, Wimsey called for Jarvis, the ever-reliable valet, whose memory for detail was as keen as his loyalty. "Jarvis, was there any mention among the staff of unusual deliveries or visitors in the days preceding the tragedy?" Jarvis rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "Now you mention it, my lord, the kitchen staff were baffled by a new herbal tincture," the cook requested. "They said it was brought by a friend of the family from London, delivered in a plain package. No one knew the sender's name." "London," Wimsey repeated, the faintest gleam in his eye. "A courier with discretion. Perhaps a message cloaked in poison." He turned to Bunter. "Have the servants kept any trace of the package, wrappings, labels, or any discarded evidence?" Bunter shook his head. "Nothing remains, sir. The package was quickly disposed of, likely by the cook." Wimsey's gaze narrowed. "We must speak with the cook without delay." The cook, Mrs. Clemens, was found in the kitchen, a stout woman with flour-dusted hands and a wary gaze. Her first reaction to Wimsey's visit was one of suspicion, softened only by the gentle manner with which he approached her. "Mrs. Clemens," he began, "I understand you received a parcel late at night recently. Might I inquire as to its contents?" Mrs. Clemens hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. "Yes, my lord, it was an herbal tincture sent by an apothecary friend. Miss Diana had asked for it. It was meant to ease her nerves." "And did you prepare it yourself?" "Yes, my lord, but I did not know what was in it. Miss Diana gave instructions to mix it into her evening tea." Wimsey's eyes twinkled. "A tincture for nerves, but might it not have been something more potent?" Mrs. Clemens shook her head vehemently. "No, sir, I swear it was harmless. Miss Diana was fragile of late. She hoped it would calm her." "Did anyone else handle the package or the tincture?" "No, my lord, only me and Miss Diana." "Thank you, Mrs. Clemens. Your honesty is appreciated." As Wimsey left the kitchen, his mind churned. The tincture was a plausible vector for poison, yet Mrs. Clemens's testimony suggested ignorance rather than complicity. The question remained, who sent the parcel, and was the tincture truly benign? Later that afternoon, Wimsey requested to examine the clock once more, his curiosity about its mechanical failure unrelenting. The clockmaker's report had confirmed that the internal gears had been deliberately tampered with, specifically, the escapement mechanism that regulates the tick. "Bunter," Wimsey remarked as he inspected the clock's innards, "our murderer possesses a subtle knowledge of mechanics. The stoppage was intended to mask the exact time of death, creating confusion in the timeline." Bunter nodded. "A clever ruse, sir, but why? To establish an alibi or to implicate another?" "Perhaps both, or neither. Timing is the skeleton key in any locked room mystery." Wimsey closed the clock carefully. "We must reconstruct the events of that night with a precision to confound even the most eager of investigators." As dusk fell, Wimsey summoned all the household to the drawing room. The family members, still pallid with shock and suspicion, gathered reluctantly. With a dry smile, Wimsey began his inquiries anew, shifting his focus to their alibis and behavior. Lady Dorothy Vestris, still composed, claimed to have been reading in her chamber until late. Her son, Edward, stated he had retired early due to a headache. The Reverend Cole was said to have been in his study, preparing Sunday's sermon. Wimsey's gaze lingered on Edward. "Tell me, Mr. Vestris, did you notice anything amiss that night? Any unusual sounds, lights, or visitors?" Edward shifted uneasily. "No, Lord Wimsey, nothing out of the ordinary." "And yet you were seen leaving the library about 10:30. Wimsey pressed gently. Edward hesitated. "Yes, I needed fresh air. The house was stifling." "Indeed. And the library door, was it locked behind you?" Edward nodded. "Yes, I always lock the door when I leave." "Ah, but the library door was found unlocked the following morning," Wimsey noted. "How do you explain this discrepancy?" Edward swallowed. I must have forgotten." Wimsey's smile was sardonic, but not unkind. "Memory is a curious thing, especially when one's nerves are frayed." The tension thickened as the household absorbed these subtle contradictions. Wimsey allowed the silence to stretch before shifting to Reverend Cole. "Reverend, your nocturnal activities are less documented. Might you recount your movements that evening?" The clergyman adjusted his spectacles. "I was indeed engaged in study, Lord Wimsey. The church bells rang at 10 and I took no further excursions thereafter." Wimsey's eyes twinkled. "Curious, for the bell ringer reported an extra chime, one not on the official schedule, around midnight. Might you explain this anomaly?" The Reverend's composure faltered. I am not responsible for the bell ringing after 10. "Then someone else was abroad at midnight," Wimsey mused, "coinciding with our mysterious delivery and the clock stoppage." As the night deepened, the pieces began to align like the hands of a clock moving inexorably toward revelation. Wimsey's mind danced between timelines, motives, and subtle betrayals. The house was no longer a silent witness, but a conspirator in a drama woven from jealousy, secrets, and quiet desperation. Bunter, ever the steady presence, leaned in. "Shall we retire, sir, or press the advantage?" Wimsey took one last contemplative puff of his pipe. "We press, Bunter, for truth, like time, waits for no one, and the next move will surely unsettle more than just dust upon the shelves." Thus, the game continued, the shadows gathering around Haverley as the clock ticked on, marking the hours until the final, inevitable confrontation. The following morning dawned bleak and unyielding, a fine drizzle pattering against the mullioned windows of Haverley with an almost deliberate persistence. The manor, cloaked in its customary gloom, seemed to breathe with a newfound tension, as if the very walls themselves were awaiting the unravelling of a secret too long concealed. Lord Peter Wimsey stood by the window in the library, a cup of unsweetened tea poised in his hand, his gaze fixed upon the sodden garden beyond, where the garden paths gleamed like polished obsidian. His thoughts, however, were far from the dripping shrubs or the distant line of grey hills. The puzzle before him tightened its grip, a delicate weave of deception and human frailty. The house, which earlier had seemed merely an imposing shell, now presented itself as a stage set, with carefully placed props, each detail, however trivial it might seem, bearing the potential to unravel or reinforce the mystery. Bunter entered, silently, carrying a small leather-bound notebook and a sheaf of papers. Sir, I have reviewed the statements and compared the timelines once more. There remains a stubborn anomaly in the sequence of events around midnight. Ah, the hour of our midnight visitor, Whimsy murmured. Have you cross-referenced? The church bell chimes with the household clocks again. Indeed, sir. The church clock chimed at exactly midnight, yet the manor's own clock, deliberately tampered with, as you noted, ceased its ticking just moments before. This cessation, coupled with the mysterious delivery, creates a narrow window during which our culprit acted unseen. Whimsy nodded slowly, eyes narrowing. A temporal veil behind which guilt might hide. And yet the question remains, who benefits most from this carefully orchestrated concealment? Their reflections were interrupted by the arrival of Inspector Charles Parker, whose expression betrayed both respect and a faint hint of exasperation. "Lord Peter," he greeted, briskly. "I have secured statements from several villagers who noticed unusual comings and goings around Haverley these past days, particularly a Mrs. Agnes Carmichael, the widow who lives just beyond the eastern hedge, claims to have seen a cloaked figure near the kitchen window on the night in question." "Mrs. Carmichael, you say?" "An observer at the periphery," Whimsy observed. "The perspective from the edges of the stage often reveals what the actors within fail to perceive." Parker continued. "She insists the figure was slender, moved quickly and carried what appeared to be a small package. She also noted that the kitchen window was slightly ajar, though the housekeeper denies it was ever opened that night." "Oh, a discrepancy then," Whimsy murmured, already piecing the puzzle together. "May I have her statement, Inspector?" Parker handed over the folded paper, which Whimsy unfolded and read with the slow deliberation of a man who savoured every word, as if it were a fine cigar. The widow's account was precise, even poetic in its detail, yet carried a hint of that characteristic British reticence which veiled outright accusation. Miss Norbury, the housekeeper, was quite adamant that the kitchen window remained closed. Whimsy remarked, "Yet the eyewitness insists otherwise. We must investigate this contradiction, for such a detail, however minute, often forms the hinge upon which the entire mystery turns." After a brief detour through the servants' quarters, to reassure the staff that no blame was being cast, Whimsy and Parker approached the kitchen at the back of the house. The window in question was a modest casement, set high enough to discourage casual entry, but the latch was indeed slightly loose. "Careful, Inspector," Whimsy warned as he examined the latch. "A window left ajar is either an invitation or an oversight. Which shall it be?" Parker pressed his ear to the window pane. No sound from within, though with the weather, few would dare whisper loudly. Whimsy tapped the sill gently. "Note the faint scuff marks on the paint here. Fresh, I would say. Someone has either opened this window recently or attempted to simulate the effect of intrusion." "An attempt to mislead," Parker concluded. "Precisely. Our murderer is not merely clever, but theatrical, a characteristic most becoming in a crime that would otherwise be banal." With a sigh, Parker noted the evidence for the officers to photograph and log. Meanwhile, Whimsy's attention was drawn back indoors, where the house seemed to watch him with indifferent eyes. As the day progressed, Whimsy summoned Edward Vestris once again, this time with a more pointed inquiry. "Mr. Vestris," Whimsy began smoothly, "it occurs to me that a gentleman with a headache might seek solace not only in fresh air, but also in conversation. Were you entirely alone during your late-night stroll?" Edward flushed, avoiding Whimsy's sharp gaze. I encountered Reverend Cole briefly in the hall. He was headed to the study." "And did you accompany him or depart separately?" "Separately, I assure you." Whimsy allowed a faint smile to curl his lips. "Yet, no one observed you crossing paths after your departure from the library, which was found unlocked the next morning. Care to explain?" Edward's composure cracked slightly. "I suppose I must have forgotten to lock it properly. Memory is a fragile thing. Under pressure," Whimsy agreed with gentle irony, "and yet such lapses sometimes conceal more than mere forgetfulness." Whimsy's thoughts drifted to the Reverend, whose earlier statement about the bell ringing had revealed cracks upon inspection. "Reverend Cole," Whimsy said, catching the clergyman in the drawing-room, "you mentioned the official bell chimes. Ended at 10, yet an extra chime was heard near midnight. Might you shed light on who might have caused this disturbance? The Reverend's hands trembled slightly. I do not know, Lord Wimsey. The bell-ringer is an elderly man prone to odd habits. It may have been an accident. Or perhaps a signal, Wimsey suggested quietly. A message in the night, intended for a select ear. The Reverend bowed his head. I fear this house. Airs haunted not by ghosts but by secrets. Secrets, Wimsey echoed, are the true phantoms that haunt the living. Later, as twilight cast long shadows across the manor's stone floors, Wimsey gathered the household once more. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation and quiet dread. Without ceremony, Wimsey produced the brown paper wrappings from the mysterious parcel, preserved carefully by Bunter. This humble package, Wimsey announced, conceals the key to our tragedy. I ask that all present consider carefully the nature of its contents. He unwrapped the paper with deliberate slowness, revealing a small glass vial filled with a dark liquid. An herbal tincture, yes, but one laced with a rare poison, one that simulates symptoms of a fainting spell before causing paralysis. Gasps echoed softly through the room. Mrs. Clemens, Wimsey said, you prepared this mixture for Miss Diana at her behest. Tell me, did she mention anyone else aware of her prescription? Mrs. Clemens swallowed nervously. Only Miss Diana and myself, sir. And yet, someone else must have known or had means to obtain such a tincture. The poison could not simply have appeared by chance. Wimsey's eyes scanned the room. Who had motive to harm Miss Diana, yet wished to mask it as an accident or illness? A taut silence followed. Then Edward's face paled. You mean, aunt, it was one of us? He whispered. Indeed, Wimsey said, and the timeline, the clock's sabotage, the open window, all were staged to mislead and conceal a carefully crafted crime. As the household absorbed this revelation, Wimsey allowed himself a moment's pause, savoring the quiet triumph of logic over obfuscation. Yet he knew the final act was yet to come, the moment when shadows would part to reveal the guilty hand. Tomorrow, he said softly, we shall piece together the final fragments. For tonight the curtain merely falls on an act, not the play itself. The manor exhaled its secrets into the gathering dusk, and beneath the surface, the true horror of betrayal awaited its unmasking. The following morning emerged grey and subdued, as if the very air around Haverley had been drained of its usual vitality. Lord Peter Wimsey stood once more in the great hall, the carved oak panels seeming to close in with a weighty silence that bespoke the gravity of the night's revelations. The household had gathered, faces taut with apprehension, the polite, a veneer of civility wearing thin under the strain of unspoken suspicion. It was in moments such as these that Wimsey's peculiar blend of irony and acuity came most to the fore. He was less a man of bluster than a patient spider, weaving his web with precision and waiting for the inevitable tremor of guilt. I trust you all found last evening's disclosure as edifying as I did, Wimsey began, his tone lightly sardonic, yet impeccably measured. A tincture, rare and obscure, capable of simulating the ailments of faintness and feebleness before its true, insidious effects take hold. Miss Diana's sudden illness, therefore, may no longer be taken as mere misfortune, but rather as a carefully engineered act. A faint murmur rippled through the gathering. Edward Vestris's fingers twitched nervously. The Reverend Cole's jaw tightened. Mrs. Clemens averted her eyes, hands clenched in her lap. But, Wimsey continued, the presence of the poison alone is but a single thread. The tapestry is incomplete without the arrangement of movements and opportunities, the subtle discrepancies in time and place, and above all, the human element, the jealousies, resentments, and fears that compel one to commit what is both crime and tragedy. His gaze flicked to the housekeeper, then the servants, then to the younger members of the household. It is often said that the devil is in the details, and details are precisely what we must scrutinize. The window left ajar, the clock's untimely silence, the unexplained footfalls on the garden path, each a clue to the invisible hand that guided these events. Wimsey turned toward Inspector Parker. I believe, Inspector, it is time to revisit certain testimonies with a keener eye. For instance, Mrs. Carmichael's account of the cloaked figure bearing a package. Have we considered thoroughly who might possess both the motive and means to undertake such a nocturnal errand? Parker nodded, pulling his notebook from his coat pocket. "We have statements from most in the village, but none offer anything concrete beyond Mrs. Carmichael's observation. The problem is that the cloaked figure's description is frustratingly vague, slender, moving quickly. Could be anyone, or no one. Vagueness, a cloak of anonymity," Whimsy mused. "But it is a cloak often donned by the guilty to shield from prying eyes. Tell me, have we any knowledge of who might be expected to deliver parcels at unusual hours?" Parker's eyebrows lifted slightly. "Deliveries are rare at Haverley after dusk, save for urgent letters or medicines. The housekeeper mentioned a courier arriving in the afternoon, but nothing else." "Yet we know the parcel with the tincture was brought here sometime in the dark hours," Whimsy replied. "Curious, is it not, that the parcel's packaging was so deliberately preserved, yet no record of its arrival exists?" Parker made a note. "We should question the local postman and the apothecary again, I think." "Indeed." Meanwhile, Whimsy said, "I find myself compelled to return to the matter of the clock. The Manor's clock ceased at precisely 11:57 p.m., if I recall correctly." Bunter, ever attentive, nodded from the doorway. "This cessation," Whimsy continued, "was no accident. It was deliberate, designed to conceal the true time of events, yet the church clock with its unwavering chimes betrays this facade. The discordance between the two is the very key to reconstructing the timeline accurately." He beckoned Parker to accompany him to the drawing room, where a large grandfather clock stood sentinel. Together, they examined its mechanism. "The Tangier's hands were forcibly held at 11:57, Whimsy said, yet the pendulum had continued swinging briefly after, suggesting a recent and intentional interference. Someone familiar with horology, no doubt, for the act was subtle but not subtle enough." Parker's eyes narrowed. Who in the household might possess such knowledge? "A question worth pondering," Whimsy acknowledged. "Edward Vestris comes to mind, a scholar with an interest in mechanics. Yet suspicion must not be cast without cause." Returning to the assembled household, Whimsy directed his attention to the servants. "Tell me, Mrs. Clemens, did you notice any irregularities in the routine of the household the night Miss Diana fell ill? Were there footsteps where none should have been? Voices that should not have spoken?" Mrs. Clemens hesitated, then spoke, in a low voice. "I heard nothing out of the ordinary until the commotion early morning, but there was a curious thing. Miss Diana's usual glass of water was not touched that night, though it was placed at her bedside as always." "An omission of importance," Whimsy remarked, "if the poison was administered by other means." He turned toward the footman, a young man named Harris. "And you, Harris, were your duties completed as usual?" The youth blinked. "Yes, sir, though I did hear the kitchen door open around midnight. Thought it strange, but did not see who went out." "Precisely the hour we suspect," Whimsy said. "The ajar kitchen window, the midnight footsteps, the absent water. Pieces of a larger puzzle. One wonders if the poison was introduced not through the water, but rather through the very vial delivered under cover of night." As the interviews unfolded, Whimsy's mind remained alert to contradictions. The Reverend's insistence on the bell ringer's eccentricity, Edward's nervousness, the housekeeper's careful denials, all wove together like threads in a tapestry that refused to be smoothed. Later, in the privacy of his chambers, Whimsy spread the gathered notes before him. The night's events, when charted meticulously, revealed a pattern of movements that were anything but accidental. The clock's manipulation provided a window of opportunity, narrow yet exploitable. The courier's cloak concealed identity. Yet, the parcel's distinctive packaging suggested familiarity. The kitchen window's ajar position was no careless oversight, but a deliberate misdirection. Most telling was the psychological profile emerging, someone desperate to hide a secret, yet compelled by guilt to stage a performance worthy of a theatre. With a slow smile, Whimsy poured himself a fresh cup of tea, the aroma mingling with the faintest trace of tobacco from his pipe. "Ah, Bunter," he said, "the game deepens. We have yet to reveal the truth concealed beneath these layers of polite deceit. Tomorrow's dawn shall find us closer to the heart of the matter." Outside, the rain continued to fall, each drop a reminder that the surface of Haverley had been disturbed, and beneath, dark currents stirred, waiting to be drawn into the light. Lord Peter Wimsey awoke with the first pale light filtering through the heavy draperies of his chamber at Haverley Manor. The relentless rain had abated, leaving behind a sodden earth and a sky washed clean of its nocturnal gloom. Yet within the house a certain tension persisted, like a taut string vibrating just beneath the surface of genteel civility. After the previous evening's painstaking interviews and careful sifting of details, Wimsey felt the inexorable tightening of the net. The truth was close but still elusive. He dressed with his customary fastidiousness, adjusting his cravat with an almost theatrical precision before descending to the library, where Bunter awaited with the Morning Post and a steaming pot of tea. The butler's expression was grave but deferential, as always, and Wimsey found comfort in the ritual. "Any news from Inspector Parker?" Wimsey inquired, accepting his cup. "Not yet, my lord. He is still reviewing the alibis and witness statements." There was, however, a visitor from the village this morning, a Mr. Samuel Grafton, the apothecary, Bunter added, producing a neatly folded note. Wimsey unfolded the parchment with a flick of his wrist and scanned the message. "Lord Peter Wimsey, I thought it best to come in person rather than correspond. There are matters concerning the tincture and certain deliveries that may shed light on your inquiries. Shall I join you shortly in the library? Yours sincerely, Samuel Grafton." "Excellent," Wimsey remarked. "I trust the apothecary will provide clarity where others have been vague." The moments that followed were spent in quiet reflection, punctuated only by the ticking of the library clock, a subtle reminder that time, though malleable in investigation, remained ultimately relentless. Soon, the door opened to admit a middle-aged man of somewhat stooped bearing, his face marked by the long familiarity of concern and the faint scent of herbs clinging to his person. "Mr. Grafton," Wimsey greeted warmly. "I am glad you came. Pray, tell me everything you know about the tincture delivered to Haverley." "In recent days," Grafton nodded, settling into a chair. "My lord, the tincture in question is indeed uncommon, an obscure formulation used for rare nervous ailments. I had been requested to procure it by a courier, arriving rather late on the evening before Miss Diana's collapse. The package was peculiar, wrapped carefully and bearing no sender's name. The courier, cloaked and masked, gave no indication as to whom he served, only that it must reach Miss Diana without delay." "And the courier's identity?" Wimsey prompted. "Unknown to me. I did not see his face, only his gloved hands. I have dealt with many such messengers, but this one was unusual in his discretion and haste." Wimsey steepled his fingers, eyes narrowed thoughtfully. "Curious. And the apothecary's records, do they reflect this transaction?" "Not officially," Grafton admitted. "I was paid in cash, delivered with instructions to leave no trace. It struck me as odd, but I am accustomed to discretion where illness and social standing intersect." "Indeed," Wimsey murmured. "A clandestine arrangement, then. Tell me, Mr. Grafton, have you ever heard of anyone in the household with a particular interest in such remedies, or perhaps a grievance that might lead one to administer a harmful dose?" Grafton hesitated. "There was talk, whispered, naturally, that Miss Diana was engaged in some secret correspondence, not about illness, but business affairs, perhaps. Nothing concrete, but enough to suggest tensions beneath the surface." Wimsey's lips curved into a faint smile. Secrets seldom remain buried long in a household like this. "I thank you for your candor." As Grafton departed, Wimsey turned, his attention to the puzzle anew. The late-night courier, the unrecorded delivery, the absence of any formal trail, all pointed to a deliberate orchestration. Yet the question remained, who, within this web of genteel relations and simmering resentments, had both the knowledge and the motive? His thoughts were interrupted by a soft rap at the door. It was Inspector Parker, summoned by Bunter and appearing somewhat more alert than before. "Good morning, my lord. I have revisited the alibis, as requested, and cross-checked several. Timelines, there is a discrepancy I wish to discuss." "Do sit," Wimsey invited, gesturing to a nearby chair. "I was just pondering the same. Pray, enlighten me." "The Reverend Cole," Parker began, "claims to have been in his study at the time of Miss Diana's collapse, occupied with parish records, yet the housekeeper reports having seen him near the East Wing corridor around 11:45, the very hour our clock ceased functioning." Whimsy raised an eyebrow. A discrepancy in timekeeping and location. Intriguing. What reason might he have to stray from his stated whereabouts? None evident. When questioned, the Reverend became evasive and insisted on his innocence. Evasions. Like shadows often conceal truths, Whimsy remarked. Has he any knowledge of poisons or medical tinctures? None on record. But he does possess a keen interest in botany and herbal lore. Noted. And what of the nephews, Edward and Philip Vestris? Edward, as you know, was unaccounted for during the crucial time. He claims to have been walking the grounds, seeking inspiration for his latest manuscript. Philip was in his room, or so the servants say. Whimsy tapped his chin. A convenient alibi, those rooms of the young and solitary. But opportunity may be found in the smallest details. He rose and paced, musing aloud. The missing salver, the ajar kitchen window, the deliberate stopping of the clock, all devices to manipulate perception and obscure the timeline. And yet, none of these would suffice without a knowledge of human nature, of how suspicion might be diverted, how guilt might masquerade as innocence. Parker nodded, the hint of admiration in his eyes. You always say the criminal's greatest error is underestimating the detective's understanding of psychology. Precisely, Inspector, for in the dance of deception, it is not the strength of the lie, but the weakness of the belief that reveals the truth. The inspector's phone rang, breaking the moment. He answered briefly, then turned to Whimsy. There's been a development. A letter addressed to Miss Diana was found in the village post office, mistakenly undelivered. It arrived too late to be read before the tragedy. Let us retrieve this letter immediately, Whimsy said, his voice sharpening with renewed purpose. It may illuminate motives or expose secrets hitherto hidden. The pair set out at once, accompanied by Bunter, toward the post office. The village was stirring to life, the streets still damp and gleaming with rain. At the clerk's desk the letter was produced, an envelope bearing Diana's name in a delicate hand, sealed with an unfamiliar crest. Whimsy examined it carefully. No postmark, no stamp. Odd for a letter not dispatched through official channels, the clerk shrugged. Found mislaid among other correspondence, sir. Perhaps sent directly or left behind by the same courier who brought the tincture. Whimsy carefully broke the seal, revealing a brief but pointed note. Miss Diana, beware the company you keep. Trust not the smiles of those closest, for envy and greed wear the mask of friendship. Look to the east wing. Answers lie where the past is buried. A friend, cryptic, yet charged with import, Whimsy mused aloud. The past, the east wing. Could this be a clue to hidden tensions or secrets long concealed within these walls? Parker furrowed his brow. The east wing has been closed for years, ever since the old scandal involving the late Lord Haverley's brother. Ah, the scandal, Whimsy said softly. A convenient place to hide skeletons, literal and figurative. We must examine the east wing forthwith. Returning to the manor, they approached the east wing, a section of the house heavy with dust and silence. The door, once locked, was found unlatched, as if inviting inquiry. Whimsy entered, his keen eyes sweeping the faded tapestries and neglected furniture. Whimsy began deliberately. The events of the past weeks, the threats, the cryptic letters, the untimely collapse of Miss Diana, all were threads of a single carefully woven tapestry. Tonight, I shall unravel it. He held up the ledger, discovered, in the East Wing's library, the name C etched in his mind. The shadow C is no stranger, but one of you here connected by blood and vested interest. He turned to Philip. Your recent inheritance and the codicil stirred unrest, yes, but your alibi holds firm, corroborated by the halted clock and absence of visitors. Philip nodded, relief flickering in his eyes. Yet, Whimsy continued, the motive runs deeper than mere fortune. A secret buried within the family history threatened exposure, a scandal that C sought to suppress at all costs. He glanced at Edward, whose composure wavered. Edward, the letters you sent to Lady Haverley, signed only with your initial, bear the cryptic phrase, the serpent's hiss beneath the rose's bloom. You attempted to shield the family's name, but your means turned deadly. The room gasped. Edward's facade cracked, his voice trembling. I only wished to protect us. The scandal would destroy everything mother and father built. And yet, Wimsey said quietly, your desperation drove you to poison Diana's. Drink, the very act that nearly claimed her life. The stopped clock was your ploy to disguise the time and the severed telephone lines to delay discovery. Inspector Parker stepped forward to place Edward under arrest as he muttered broken apologies. Lady Haverley, tears streaming, nodded slowly. It is a painful truth, but perhaps the one we must face to heal. Wimsey concluded, justice may be harsh, but it is the only path through darkness. Let this be a reminder that secrets, no matter how well concealed, inevitably find the light. As Edward was led away, the heavy tension lifted, leaving a somber peace. Lord Peter Wimsey exchanged a brief look with Bunter, the case closed, but the scars it left etched forever in the quiet halls of Haverley Manor. The morning sun rose higher, promising clarity and renewal, a fitting end to the mystery woven through shadows and whispered threats.